Good afternoon. Thanks so much for joining us today. My name is Mike Connors. I'm the Director of Customer Success at Ecobot. This is the 8th in our webinar series on the convergence of technology and wetland science. Today's topic is the rise of women in wetland science and technology. We have a super impressive panel of presenters today who will be introduced in just a minute or two. Thanks in advance to all of you for the expertise you're here to share today. I think it's going to be super interesting. For everyone in the audience, please use the Q&A button down at the bottom of the Zoom window. Feel free to ask any questions as you think of them. We're going to do our best to route those questions to the best person to answer them. If you can include who the question is for while you ask it, that would actually be the most helpful for that to work quickly. Also note, we're recording the webinar, so if anyone needs to leave early, don't worry, you can still watch the rest later on. And if you registered, you will get a follow-up email with a link to where that video will be posted. Our host today is my colleague, Jeremy Schewe, co-founder and chief scientific officer at Ecobot, with nearly 2 decades of prior experience as a wetland scientist. Jeremy, I will hand it off to you and you can get things started.
Great, thank you. And Daniel Martin couldn't make it today to join us. Alana Cloud, our coworker here at Ecobot, is going to be helping co-host with also with Angela Stanley. So as usual, I want to just start us off before I hand it over to Alana here with just a reminder of why we do what we do. The protection of the waters of our nation, of the world, utmost importance. We are the people who oftentimes help to understand what's going on in the patterns of nature and what are happening with the flow of water and where it's moving. And the protection of that is a big part of our responsibility, to be a voice for the voiceless and to bring our voice to council, to bring our voice to policy, to bring our voice to engineering, to planning, and to our 21st century. So today we're going to meet all of our panelists after Alana has kicked us off with a little bit of a opening to dial us into women working in wetland science and technology. But we're going to leave different than past webinars. This is our 9th in the series. The majority of the time is going to be allocated for the panel discussion for the second half of our time here together. So, but we are going to give everyone an opportunity to introduce themselves. So I'm going to introduce my coworker, Alana Cloud, and it's been an honor to work with her for the last year, and feel like she is an excellent voice for what we have to mix in here together. So Alana Cloud, welcome, Alana. I'm going to turn it over to you and mute myself until we're done.
Thanks, Jeremy, and thank you to both our panelists and all of the attendees here today. Super, super excited to see so many amazing faces, names joining us, and also super excited to get to set the stage here for the importance of this conversation that we're having today. So before we head into our panel discussion, I want to take everybody briefly through kind of the unique circumstances that exist for women who choose to pursue careers in both wetland science and STEM in general. So Jeremy, if you want to go ahead and pop to the next slide. So throughout history, and in particular the past century and prior, women have been major contributors to the modern environmental science space. A few noteworthy examples that most of you might recognize include women like Rachel Carson, whose book Silent Spring revealed the deep environmental problems caused by the overuse of pesticides. And she is also widely credited for her major role in the modern environmental movement. Berta Cáceres was a Honduran environmental activist whose efforts brought international attention to the threat that dam development created for local peoples and their environment. Marjorie Stoneman Douglas definitely relevant when we're talking about wetlands here today, was a conservationist known for her staunch defense of the Everglades against efforts to drain it and reclaim the land for development. So these women are only a few of many, many groundbreaking women leaders involved in the emergence of environmental science and activism. So let's jump ahead and look at the state of where we are today. So currently, the number of women in STEM is growing. It's been increasing significantly since the 1990s. In 2009, just over 140,000 women graduated with STEM degrees. By 2016, that number had grown to over 200,000, which is nearly a 43% increase in just 7 years. But as you can see on the screen here, we still have a lot of work to do. So today, women represent only 28% of the overall STEM workforce. But interestingly enough, in the biological services field, that number jumps to 47%. So definitely something to acknowledge in terms of the number of women representing here today, and environmental biological services in general. But why does this gap still exist? You know, the STEM gap is widely recognized in terms of the disproportionate barriers that women still encounter today when they're looking to join the STEM space. These include things like gender stereotypes and math anxiety. STEM fields are often viewed as masculine, and teachers, parents often underestimate math abilities of young girls. There's often male-dominated cultures because fewer women work and study in STEM, and these fields tend to perpetuate inflexible, exclusionary, male-dominated cultures. There's also, which we're going to talk about significantly, is there's often fewer role models. Today, we definitely highlight some really important role models that I think a lot of the younger generation of girls in STEM can look up to, but typically girls have fewer examples of people like them to inspire their interest in these fields. So moving ahead to the next slide here. In 2009, the UN declared the International Day of Women and Girls in Science. There has been, in the past couple of decades, a lot more recognition for the important role that women play in STEM, as well as the disproportionate barriers that they tend to encounter. So, as acknowledged on the screen, it's essential and more recognized that we need to close that gender gap that we saw earlier to really bring more women into these fields, to really promote innovation in both science, technology, and engineering. So what can we do about it? So what you're going to see here, as of today, there are dozens of organizations working to empower women to participate in STEM by building a supportive community of role models and mentors to help bridge that gap. Some of those organizations include, especially prominent is in the Society of Wetland Scientists, the Women in Wetlands group. There is the American Association of University Women, Scientista, Million Women Mentors, largely focused on bringing together a network of women who are participating in the space, excelling in the space, to help inspire younger generations to join the field. So next slide here, Jeremy. So that's what organizations are doing, but what can we as firms, as individuals, and as companies do to help take action and do the hard work to bridge that gap? We can start by inspiring the next generation by mentoring girls and young women early in their educational careers. We can work to retain women leaders by creating a work environment that supports those who might be returning to work after a time to start a family, or by smashing gender bias in the workplace and in policy across the board, and addressing the lingering pay gap. It's something that still exists today, where according to a number of different research studies, women in environmental science still make approximately 80 cents to the dollar that the man makes. So we've definitely still got a ways to go. But that's just some of what we can do as organizations and individuals to help take action. But what we're here to do today is talk about the amazing women that have bridged that gap, that have overcome any barriers that they've encountered in their careers to become leaders in the space. So next slide, Jeremy. So in the onus on improving gender diversity in STEM cannot be placed solely on individual women's shoulders, but systematic change can be slow. So how can women like our amazing panelists today navigate their fields to be successful despite those pervasive structural barriers that we talked about earlier? So in 2018, the Harvard Business Review published results of a 10-year study on what makes women successful in STEM. Some of these factors include claiming credit for your ideas. Too often in history, we've seen men get the credit for huge advancements that have been made by actually their female counterparts. We need to invest in peer networks, and by investing in those peer networks and building up other women, we're empowering other women to rise up. Building up proteges, so that's the mentorship, right? Being authentic to and owning exactly who you are and your accomplishments, and projecting the confidence that says, I'm a woman in this space that otherwise has barriers in place and probably structural challenges that I might disproportionately encounter, but by projecting that confidence and owning the success, women can absolutely attain unlimited success. So with that, I'm super excited to introduce our amazing panel of 9 accomplished women from across the wetland science and technology space. The conversation today is going to be moderated by myself and Angela Stanley. And as Jeremy mentioned, we'll go ahead and start with brief introductions from each of our panelists, and then we'll leave time following those introductions for Q&A and conversation. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and pass the reins over to our first panelist.
So Alana, thank you so much for the wonderful introduction to this webinar. Thanks everyone for joining us, and thanks to Ecobot for making this possible by helping us build our community. My name is Megan Lang, and I've been what Bill Weiland terms a wetlander since at least my time in undergraduate, when I spent my summers in an abandoned rice field assessing hydraulic succession. But I suspect that I was a wetlander long before that. I'm currently the chief scientist for the National Wetlands Inventory. I've really had the privilege of supporting many impactful wetland efforts over the years, but I believe that the impact of the Wetland Status and Trends project is really what I'm most proud of. And so Status and Trends measures wetland area and change through time, and we report that information to the American public and to Congress at least once a decade. This is very much a collaborative effort, and it has greatly benefited from the support of multiple federal agencies, including NOAA. And at NOAA, it has greatly benefited from the participation and support of Susan Marie Stedman, who you will soon hear from. I feel very lucky to be part of the Status and Trends project, a project that not only provides the yardstick used to measure the effects of policies like no net loss, but also a project that has catalyzed billions of dollars worth of wetland conservation and restoration dollars. And with that, I'll pass the torch.
Thank you very much, Megan. And I am also very proud to be part of the Status and Trends work that Fish and Wildlife Service leads. I am a wetland scientist who was fortunate enough to grow up on a salt marsh on Cape Cod. So I've been a wetlander for as long as I can remember, nothing I love more than the smell of low tide. My background is in coastal geology and marine science. And I have been working for NOAA since 1993, when they hired me to be their Clean Water Act specialist. And the first project I got to work on, and the one that was, I think, probably to this day, the most fun project I've ever worked on, was something that's called the Federal Guidance for the Establishment, Use, and Operation of Mitigation Banks. And if you're not familiar with what a mitigation bank is, it's essentially a commercial approach to fulfilling the compensatory mitigation requirements of people who get Clean Water Act permits. And I came in at the beginning of the Clinton administration, and the Clinton administration wanted to change the way things have been done among federal agencies and get us to cooperate better. In particular, the Clinton administration wanted us to work out any differences we had before anything got sent to the public. And so the Council of Environmental Quality formed something called the White House Wetlands Working Group that included staff and political people and lawyers from all the federal agencies that were working on wetlands at the time. And I was the staff person. And what was interesting was that the political person I was working with was female, and the lawyer I was working with from NOAA was female, and everybody else in that group was male. So it was kind of interesting that, you know, we'd go to these meetings in our power suits, and we'd enter the room, and we'd be like, here we are, the women of NOAA. But at the staff level, this project was fun because I was working with people who were very open-minded, and for the most part, young. And half of that group was female too. And so what I remember from that time is people who were very, very intent on developing good guidance for this new industry of mitigation banking, and basing what we were developing on science. And we also had advisors from the Army Corps of Engineers Institute of Water Resources, some economics advisors. So we developed guidance that was based on science and on economics. And I think that guidance stood for more than 20 years before the Army Corps of Engineers adopted it essentially as their 2008 mitigation rule. And that mitigation banking industry is now a $25 billion industry that supports more than 200,000 jobs. It's expanded into not only Clean Water Act permits, but Endangered Species Act compensation, and even compensation under the Oil Pollution Act and CERCLA. So it was a pretty amazing thing to be involved in at the beginning of my career at NOAA. And I think that, at least I hope, that our new administration will reinitiate some of that desire for cooperation and thinking outside the box.
All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Marla Stelk. I'm the Executive Director at the Association of State Wetland Managers. ASWM is a national 501c3 nonprofit organization. And although our name of our organization may seem that we're exclusive to state wetland programs, we're actually not. Anyone can be a member, and we work with a lot of folks in federal government, tribes, other nonprofits, the private sector as well. I have been in my role at the association as executive director since 2018. Previous to that, I worked with the association as a policy analyst, and I was originally hired in 2013. Wetlands weren't necessarily a huge part of my professional life before coming to the association, although I had taken a lot of science courses, and I actually have had a wetland delineation course, so I can do that. But my background is really mostly in environmental policy. My first project at the organization was on a 2-year EPA National Wetland Program Development Grant funded project titled Raising the Bar on Wetland Restoration Success Nationwide. The project was designed to look back at the rate of success or lack thereof in wetland restoration since the landmark 1989 publication, the Wetland Creation and Restoration, the Status of the Science, was published. That was edited by John Kussler, ASWM's founder, along with Mary Cantula, Dr. Mary Cantula, I should say. So that publication had multiple contributors to it, some of which we were actually able to bring onto our work group for that particular project. My favorite, well, I shouldn't say my favorite, but one of my biggest role models that became one of my biggest role models after working with her was Dr. Joy Zedler, who was one of the original contributors to that publication and who was an integral, very active member of that work group. And for those of you who are not familiar with Dr. Zedler, I highly recommend looking at her large volume of work. She's one of the biggest role models in my mind in terms of wetland science for women out there. Also had Robin Lewis, Mark Fonseca, Joe Schischler, Robert Brooks. It was a really great team of people. We had about 25 total on that working group. Our final white paper that we collectively worked on as that group was entitled Wetland Restoration, Contemporary Issues and Lessons Learned, which laid a roadmap for ways in which we could collectively and individually achieve greater performance outcomes for multiple different types of wetland restorations. But I still think of it as my favorite project because of the diverse and collaborative nature of the work that we did. And we were able to achieve a really great volume of recorded webinars. But it also allowed me to follow my passion and write a white paper that you see on here titled Ecosystem Service Valuation for Wetland Restoration, bringing together physical science, social science, merging social values, economic values, cultural values, and ecological values in a way in which daylights the intentionally or unintentionally often overlooked intrinsic values and public goods, which actually touched on a little bit in his inauguration speech, the public goods, which are all too often and left out of policy decisions in this country. So that's a passion of mine, that triple bottom line. It's been something I've been working on for over 25 years. But this project also spearheaded several other projects. So it's been a building block for us. It's been a foundation of other projects where we've moved away from just looking at the site to the larger watershed, to looking at more urban suburban centers, as well as the rural areas and how that interacts with communities. So it's allowed me to bring in my academic interests, my background, my minimal background in science, but I do have a little one, the sustainable land use and environmental economics. But it also forced me to stretch myself and learn more about and dig in more into this wetlands area of wetland science and restoration. Greatly expanded my peer network of colleagues as well. And some of you are on this panel today, which is very exciting. And so I'll leave it with that. But thank you again, Jeremy and everyone. It's an honor to be on this panel. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Melanie Vanderhoff. I'm a research geographer with the U.S. Geological Survey. I specialize in using data and imagery from satellites to look at how ecosystems respond to mechanisms of change. And a lot of my research has focused on how land use and climate influences wetlands, lakes, and rivers. The Wetland Project I want to mention, I found really rewarding because of its close ties both to policy, but also kind of the critical component that collaboration played in it. The project started in 2014. It was a cross-agency research project led by EPA's Office of Research and Development. And the purpose was to produce relevant science to inform the implementation of the Clean Water Act. The project was focused on evaluating the hydrological connectivity of wetlands to downstream waters. And this area had been identified at the time to be kind of a gap in the literature. The project was focused initially on the Prairie Pothole region, and you can see in the upper right heat map, this region has lots and lots of small wetlands. And you can see in the lower left pictures that these wetlands really respond to the dramatic climate variability that this region experiences. I led the remote sensing component of the project, and what I found to be really fun was working to integrate diverse data sets to increase our confidence in our findings. So for example, in addition to the remote sensing based analyses, I had an opportunity to collaborate with Lauren Hay, a hydrological modeler, to use field and remote sensing data to parameterize the wetland storage within the hydrological model. I collaborated with Renee Brooks, who uses isotope analysis, and we use the remote sensing products to provide a verification of the isotope work. And I also collaborated with Kate Schofield, a biologist looking at wildlife impacts, and we used the remote sensing products to look at how upland travel distances changed as wetlands responded to climate variability. And in fact, it wasn't until I went back to look at this project that I realized that most of the most successful collaborations were all other female scientists, which I hadn't even realized until I went back to look at it. But anyways, happy to be a part of the panel.
I'm honored to be part of this panel. Thank you for the invitation to join. My name is Laura Borjo-Chavez, and I'm from the Michigan Tech Research Institute, which is in Ann Arbor, Michigan. It's part of the Michigan Technological University. And there I'm a senior research scientist and also an adjunct assistant professor. But primarily I do research, and my background's in forest ecology, but I've done a lot of work in wetlands, and it's just been building over the past, more and more wetland work. And I really use what we see in the field and compare that to what we're seeing from remote sensing, and then scale that information up so we can see variability and changes going on across the landscape. I've done work in a lot of work in the Great Lakes, and actually work from the Arctic down to the tropics. But what I wanted to highlight today was a project that I've been working on since 2015, and it's where the wetlands meet wildfire. Peatlands have a very special place in my heart. I love peatlands, and as someone said earlier, I love the smell of them. the under your feet, the Labrador tea crushing, it just has this great smell every year when I go in the field. And this project is looking at the resiliency of peatlands to widespread wildfire that's been occurring in Northwest Territories. They had, I think, 3.2 hectares, 3.2 million hectares, of wildfire occurred there in 2014, and that was followed by another drought year in 2015. And so we've been focused on these fires that burned everything, wetland and upland alike, and looking at the peatlands and how they were affected by this wildfire. So in order to do that across the landscape, we visited 152 1-hectare sites, sampling everything from the burn severity to what was regrowing and the soil moisture and peat depth. And then we ended up using that to understand what was going on in 142 wildfires across that region, just shown in that bottom picture in the top left corner where it says Plains and Shield. And then from this, we needed maps of where the peatlands were. So we used remote sensing data from radar and optical data to make those maps that are shown there. The purples are the fens and bogs. And then we mapped the fire severity to the peat layer. So there's been a lot of work mapping fire severity, but it's usually to the crown. And because the crowns are usually consumed, we're able to see the ground, and it's really that organic soils that we're concerned about, because there's a lot of carbon stored there, and that has implications for both post-fire recovery as well as carbon consumption. So in this area, we've been measuring what's regrowing in the field in all of these sites, and looking at the resiliency of these peatlands to the drought conditions. In uplands, the black spruce is not as resilient. There's some cases where it's not coming back at all, and it's due to climate change and these increased droughts and fire frequency. But in peatlands, they seem to be safe havens for the black spruce, at least for now. So this project is ongoing for another couple of years, and we're also looking into modeling. So taking our field and our remote sensing data and putting that into ecosystem models as well as fire effects models to predict into the future with changes in climate what will happen. And thank you.
Hi guys, my name's Amber Robinson. I am an environmental scientist and project manager for HDR Engineering here in Lafayette, Louisiana. I am a born and bred Cajun, so wetlands are just a part of my blood. I've, grown up in coastal Louisiana, crabbing the waters, fishing, boating, so even hydrosliding in the intercoastal, believe it or not. So getting into wetland science as a young person was pretty much a no-brainer for me. My education's actually in business. I have a business management degree and an environmental and sustainable resources degree from Lafayette, University of Louisiana in Lafayette. So it was a pretty easy, I guess, transition for me to jump from school to environmental consulting, considering, it's a good thing to have a business background as well in environmental consulting. So I've been doing this for about 8 years, and I want to talk about one of my favorite projects, which actually occurred my very first year as an environmental scientist. I decided to go to school for environmental science because I knew Louisiana was losing our coastal land very quickly, and I wanted to be even a small part of that solution. And this project in particular was a result of the BP oil spill. After they did the natural resources damage assessment, the federal government does select projects through some public hearings to determine, how we will mitigate using the funds that come from the responsible party. In this case, it was BP. And I was so lucky to be able to work on one of those projects, which required an environmental impact assessment. And so that was my very first project. It was called the Louisiana Marine Fisheries Enhancement Research and Science Center. Such a long-winded name. I hated saying that name when I would talk to people. But anyway, it was basically a marine fisheries research facility that was predicted or proposed to be built one in Lake Charles and one in Plaquemines Parish in Louisiana. And they would do research on marine fishery that were impacted by things such as oil spills. Really interesting project that required a lot of field work and a lot of impact assessment work. So I was able to dip my toe in both sort of the NEPA process through this impact statement, and then also my very first wetland delineation, which was very interesting. The one in Lake Charles involved a very complex wetland complex that had NEMA mounds in it. So there was a cultural resources component to it. We used the transect method to gather data while we were out there. It was several hundred acres worth of property that we looked at. And it took 3 teams, roughly 2 to 3 weeks worth of field work. And then we came back and used that data to digitize and map out the wetlands so that I could prepare an approved jurisdictional determination application. So I got to learn so much from this project. Not only did I get to do all of that, but I had a really enlightened male boss who gave me an opportunity to also help manage the project. So I was able to kind of dabble in business management and my technical background, which was in wetland science, with this one project, all in my first year working at HDR. So incredible first experience. I really leaned into it, and it's taken me, I think, pretty far from that one project. So thanks for having me. Looking forward to the conversation.
Hi, everyone. My name is Gina O'Neill. I'm a technical consultant with Esri in the Denver, Colorado area. So my work with wetlands really centers around trying to develop an automated, cost-effective workflow for mapping wetlands, being able to do so in a way that minimizes the extent that manual surveyors need to go in, and overall just support the process of permitting wetlands and wetland management and conservation. So this work is manifested into an automated workflow entitled the Wetland Identification Model, or WIM, and it was really born out of my dissertation work at University of Virginia And I'm really lucky now to be able to carry it over and continue to develop it within my role at Esri. And in doing that, it's now implemented as an ARC Hydro toolset. And if you're not familiar with ARC Hydro, it's a set of hydrology specific spatial analytics tools and workflows. And I'll also mention that my background is in hydroinformatics, which is the intersection of hydrology and data science and informatics. So just some more details on the WIM. It uses remote sensing data and specifically LiDAR terrain to derive these topographic wetland drivers of wetland formation, and uses those within machine learning to learn from examples of wetlands to decide what are the characteristics that most often point to wetlands or probable wetlands, and then use that to predict likely wetlands in new areas. So essentially screening large areas for the most likely wetland locations. And now I am actively working on further developing the WIM. How can we set some sets of, how can we decide the characteristics other than just topographic ones to make the WIM suitable for other landscapes? And those really flat landscapes are ones like the prairie pothole region, which some women have already spoken about. And again, that end goal still continues to be to use the WIM to potentially support DOTs and other environmental planning entities to help with that wetland conservation and knowing where wetlands are in a cost-effective way. And just to kind of go over through the images here, so the two on the right are showing some example outputs of the WIM and how that sliding scale of least likely to be wetland to most likely to be wetland, and how that matches up with ground truth wetland shown on top as a black hatching and on bottom as a dark blue outline. And then to finish up with that bottom left picture, which features my dog Ernie. So my work is mostly in modeling, so I'm seriously lacking in some good fieldwork photos, but because my work centers on topography, I wanted to include one of Ernie enjoying some topography with me in Colorado. Thanks.
Hi guys, my name is Kelly Samuels. I am not able to join via video because I'm having some bandwidth issues, so I apologize for that. But I'm also pleased to be part of this panel. Thanks to everyone that arranged it and made it possible. A little bit about myself. So I was a student of agronomy up in the Northeast of the United States. And most of my colleagues at the time were starting work, doing work in turf grasses on golf courses. And I really had no interest in golf. So my major professor said, you should go to Florida. They have a lot of wetlands. And so I actually obtained an internship down in the state of Florida. So I moved from Pennsylvania to Florida and haven't left since. It's been about 25 years. I've been blessed enough to maintain a career now for 25 years here, primarily working in the Southeast within wetlands and with threatened endangered species. I had no idea that consulting was even a career choice, but I was grateful to have my eyes opened and given the opportunity, which I stayed at, and actually AECOM bought my predecessor firm. So I have all 25 years with one firm, which is kind of unusual in this day and age. The project that I wanted to talk about that I feel that I really have enjoyed over the last couple of years is conducting an environmental impact study for the National Park Service down at the Big Cypress National Preserve, which is adjacent to Everglades National Park down in South Florida. We were tasked with creating a plan for ORV use in the backcountry and how we could, create controls and management suggestions to reduce or minimize and reduce impacts as the majority of the 750,000 acres there is wetland. And some of those wetlands are highly erodible, and they are kind of unique to this area. So we went through that process. We actually just came out of the public comment process. So I'm in the process of analyzing the 1,500 comments that we got on the EIS. So I actually spent 3 hours this morning with this client right before this call, going through everything. But it's a really unique project, and it's really fun. I really enjoy consulting because I've never really do the same thing twice. We just like pick up the knowledge base and apply it and expand it. And that has, I've really enjoyed that over my career. So with that, I'll turn it over to the next person.
Hi, everybody. My name is Caitlin Burke. I work with Resource Environmental Solutions in Chicago. I've only been at this company about 6 months. It's been a blast so far. Previously, I was with a civil engineering firm in the Chicago suburbs. So most of my background is more civil engineering based, doing a lot of wetland delineation work and permitting for civil engineering projects. So I just wanted to talk about a project I did along those lines. It was a very large culvert replacement. I think it could be considered a bridge. Located up in Antioch in Lake County, Illinois, on Edwards Road. So the creek that flows through here was called the Dutch Gap Canal, and it contained the Iowa darter, which at the time was a threatened species, has since been delisted, which is a good thing. So we had to do some incidental take permitting. Obviously, we had Waters of the U.S., and so did Army Corps permitting for that. So we had very minor impact to the wetlands of the creek. And what I thought was interesting was how the project was actually constructed in a way that the creek flow could be maintained the entire time so as not to impede the route of the Iowa darter. So you can kind of tell in that upper right hand corner photograph how the cofferdam was constructed to work on half of the culvert at a time while keeping the flow going through the other half. And we also utilized the drone a lot to grab footage of the project while it was under construction. So I think that covers it for me. I think we're going to get to questions after this, and I'm excited to have the conversation.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Caitlin. And thank you so much to all of our incredible panelists. These projects are truly incredible. I'm sure everybody enjoyed hearing so much about them. So with that, let's go ahead and start transitioning over to the Q&A and panel discussion. One brief announcement, our next webinar is going to be on field office data transmission as it pertains to wetlands. So hope you guys will feel free to join us, and that'll be coming up next month. So keep an eye out for the date. So as we go ahead and transition over to our questions, again, Angela, Stanley, and I are going to be kind of guiding the discussion today, but we've been keeping an eye on the conversations in Q&A, and we'll try to get to some of those as we get through our questions. So first question today for, let's start with Megan. Would really love to hear you talk a little bit about how the wetland workforce has changed since you began your career.
So, as Alana shared with us earlier, the representation of women in the science and engineering fields has increased through time, and the proportion of women is greatest in the biological sciences. So although one person's experiences really can't be broadly generalized, what I have seen throughout my career does support these trends. So after graduating in 2005 with my doctorate, I was offered a postdoc at the USDA, and I was hesitant to accept the postdoc, which would be with a research lab, because there weren't any other female research scientists there at the time. And I didn't want to be the only one. Regardless, I accepted the position, and soon after, a female research scientist was hired. And when I left, about a decade later, there were 2 female research scientists. So that was a slow but a steady increase in representation. And then when I moved to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service in 2016, which is largely composed of biologists, I did find that I was finally surrounded by approximately equal, equal numbers of men and women, and that was great. And that definitely changed the culture. So again, my personal experience is likely just that. It's my personal experience, but it does support the general increase in representation of women in the sciences and the particularly strong representation in the biological sciences. Still, when I look at the table of contents for the book, History of Wetland Science, a Perspective from Wetland Leaders, I really can't help but notice that the folks that are interviewed, the leaders, are primarily male. In fact, only 20% of the leaders that are included within that book are female. So my sincere hope is that in the future, our representation will not only increase, at kind of within schools and within kind of mid-career level folks, but also at that top level, we really need more female leaders in the sciences.
Thanks, Megan. Susan Marie, similar question. You mentioned earlier, definitely having experience being one of a very few number of women at the table. Could you speak to kind of how you've seen things evolve over time?
Sure. NOAA is a very male-dominated organization. And when I joined it, I was the only professional female in our office. But I was kind of prepared for that because my undergraduate work was in geology, and geology is really male-dominated. And so I was kind of used to people underestimating me, and I took a lot of delight in showing them that they had underestimated me. There's a t-shirt out there that I recommend every woman get. It says, "Underestimate me, that'll be fun." So what I've seen over the years has just been amazing. I mean, right now, in my division of my office, we have 2 men and everyone else is female. And I remember sitting at a staff meeting a couple of years back when we were down to just 1 male and said, you know what, we need to talk about diversity because we don't have enough men in this division. But all kidding aside, I think that the rise of women in my workplace has been very encouraging, and it has been also, like I said, a little worrisome because I've read that fields that become dominated by women tend to become less valued. So I think there's going to be a kind of an interesting dynamic going on with that.
Thanks, Susan Marie. I'm going to pass the next question on over to Angela.
Great. So has the rise in women been as dramatic on the technology side as on the wetland side? And if not, what can we do to encourage more women to thrive in technology-focused careers? Melanie, could you address that?
Sure. Yeah, so I'm at US Geological Survey, and I just looked it up the other day, and females currently represent 35% of employees with PhDs. So actually that was much higher than I thought. We're making good progress. I started as an ecologist, delineating wetlands and doing permitting prior to getting my PhD. But over time, I've shifted from an ecologist to a remote sensor, and increasingly most of my projects involve big data, programming, cloud computing, that sort of technology. And I think a key part of having women thrive in technology-focused careers is really building those skills and an introduction to those skills into undergraduate and graduate courses. So a statistic course doesn't just have a commercial platform, you're also having students use R. And introduction to ArcGIS class doesn't just teach you, how to clip a single image, it teaches you how to use Python to clip 500 images. And ideally, programming courses with an ecology tilt or ecology applications is either a common or required part of an ecology program, an ecology degree. I suspect that if a broader range of students are introduced, both males and females are introduced to these programming concepts in their education, that's going to make them less fearful in embarking on those endeavors in their workplace.
Thank you. Gina, do you have anything to add?
Just a little bit, but I'll start saying that I completely agree with what Melanie was saying. One of my key points on this question would be that it's really important to expose just more students at undergraduate level or even before that to computer science, to modeling software, ArcGIS, just to kind of give them that exposure and the choice early on to figure out if they like it enough to let it kind of direct their further education or their career path. As far as seeing the split between male and female on the technology side, I guess I can speak from my experience in kind of like a software company, so the industry or technology industry side, and I do see more males there than a greater imbalance there than I did in graduate school. So that's just been one thing that I noticed, and I think that kind of gets back towards Melanie's point of exposing those skills to students to learn early on.
Thank you. And Caitlin, what's your take?
Sorry, I'm slow with the mute button. Yeah, I would just add a little bit, but I agree with both Gina and Melanie. As somebody who just got into more of a technological role after undergrad, like just started doing some GIS in grad school and have carried that with me. I didn't know what GIS was before grad school, and I think it almost seemed a little bit inaccessible or scary or even boring. If someone just says technology, if you don't really know, if you haven't really gotten into it and you can't see what you can do with it and how you can use it to problem solve and just help people, I think once you know that and once you learn that, it doesn't feel as inaccessible. And so that's just been my own personal experience with the technology side.
Thank you. Alana.
Yeah, so my next question is for Kelly. So Kelly, you have had such an incredible tenured career and been, like you said, lucky enough to get to see it all really happen in one place. So the question is, how has gender played a role in how you've been treated? And do you think that there have been any times where you face bias in the workplace? And also, as a follow-up to that, what kind of disadvantages or advantages did you or do you still face as a female in wetland science?
That's a lot of questions, Alana. But, so yeah, obviously, gender bias is real. I think we've all experienced it in one way or another. It's really a business issue. In my experience, it's often an unconscious or kind of like unintentional bias, which just forms this like barrier to equal opportunity. So I definitely have felt it. I would say I have felt it in ways that have been to my advantage and to my disadvantage. And just being conscious of it myself has helped, at least when it's been a negative, helped try to turn it into a positive, right? Like just having that information is something that, you know, helps you. So like, for instance, if I understood that this person was going to react better to a male asking them to do it, or, you know, whatnot, I would create the situation to where it would have the, you know, the intended outcome that's needed for the project or client, depending upon what the situation is. So I think, just generally speaking, just awareness on all levels is helpful across the board.
Yeah, absolutely. Megan, you've also had such a tenured career in so many different roles. What's your thoughts on similarly how you've experienced bias, how that might have affected you in the workplace?
Yeah, there have been so many examples of, you know, bias in the workplace, and I have no doubt that my gender has played a role in how I've been treated at work. I couldn't, you know, possibly gauge the full impact. However, I feel like it's important to share a few examples. So I did have a past supervisor who admitted to me that he just didn't understand why I put in so much effort at work. Why did I try so hard when most women and minorities just weren't interested in the sciences? I mean, he was genuinely perplexed, right? And I had another former supervisor who explained to me that my male colleagues likely didn't listen to me because men often physically have a hard time hearing women, just in general, because after all, he has a hard time listening to his wife. So, you know, looking back on what is obviously biased behavior, strangely, you know, what bothered me the most personally was not knowing how to react. What do you say to something like that? I mean, it's easy to kind of think about that now, but when you're in the moment, you know, what do you say? What should I have said? So I think that it's really important to share with all of you now that there is no one right thing to say or one right way to react. And I just hope that you know that you are not the cause of this toxic behavior and that you're entitled to feel and to react in whatever way you think is best. In terms of advantages, and I do think that there are advantages when we face bias. For me, the greatest advantage was the community that we form, perhaps partially in response to these challenges. So challenges often serve to strengthen relationships, and these relationships will get you through any challenge. So I strongly believe that it is part of the community that we have formed as a result of these challenges that we are seeing meaningful improvements in policies regarding bias towards gender and towards sexual orientation and towards race, et cetera. And to some degree, improvements in action, you know, coming together is just so important. That's it from me.
Thanks so much, Megan. Amber, I know you're a little bit newer to your career, but would love to hear, especially as someone who's also so accomplished, just kind of what your take is on the same questions.
Sure. I agree with everything the ladies said prior to me, and I guess I'll kind of just go into an example. I've faced it. I've also probably been a culprit of it, just because, you know, that happens. You have these biases that are just ingrained in us since we were, you know, small children, especially as someone living in the South. So my very first job in wetlands was an internship while I was in college. I had the opportunity to either go into a sort of planning type role or take on a field wetland scientist role. And I was with the CRIMS project here in Louisiana. So it meant I would get to be in an airboat like 3 or 4 times a week along the coast. And I was just thrilled with the idea of doing something like that. I was told at the very beginning that it was an office. It was a field office, right, in Kaplan, which is my hometown. So I thought, well, that's great. But then they said, but it's all, there's all men there, and they've never had a woman actually work in that office with them. So, I think I just strapped on my knee boots and said, you know what, I can do this. I can handle myself, and I can hold them accountable if they treat me in a way that is not allowed, So I did, and I did that by sort of just, I kind of do this with everything that I do. I didn't really say anything about it. I didn't try to call attention to myself. I literally just did the work. And one of the first things that we were asked to do was fill up some sandbags. And a few of the guys were like, oh, if you don't feel like doing this, you don't have to. And I was like, no, I can fill up sandbags. I can use a shovel. So I went out and I busted butt, and, kind of really just showed them that, I can do anything that you can do. And that was it. The summer was fine after that. And I learned a lot. And I think the guys learned a lot from me, so much so that now they always have a female in that office. So I didn't really think about it until I was thinking about this panel and what I would say. And but it was really a move for me and those group of men that changed us in some way, So it was an interesting experience that I thought was worth sharing. You got to just lean in sometimes and hold people accountable whenever you're being mistreated, and just set an example,
Definitely. I think we just, as you were talking, got some questions about how do you respond when you encounter bias, and I think you just answered that perfectly. You lean in and you do it well, and you do it right anyway. Great. Angela, why don't you take off for the next?
Yes, I'm going to address this question to Kelly first. Kelly, what challenges still exist for females that are seeking to have a successful career but still be a mom? And then along those same lines, what have you learned from being a mother, and how can women use this perspective to strengthen their career? Is Kelly on?
Kelly had to go. She had a meeting right
Okay.
at 1:30. So I'll just use that as a quick opportunity to just tell everybody we are at the end of the time that we had allotted for this conversation. There's some great questions coming in. We have great panelists. So if you do not have to go, please stick around for another 15 minutes or so, because we've got some great stuff coming in. So please stick with us.
Okay, well, I'll address the question then to Melanie. Melanie, what challenges do you think still exist for females that are seeking to balance their career with being a mom? And then is there anything you've learned from being a mother that you could use to strengthen your career?
Yeah, so in addition to my role with US Geological Survey, I am also a mom to 3 boys, a 7-year-old and twins who are 4. I had my first child halfway through my PhD program, which I still completed in 4 years. And then my twins were born about 6 months after I started with USGS. When I became pregnant with my first child, my PhD was being funded by a NASA Earth and Space Science Fellowship, and we looked through the entire manual, and they did not appear to have a maternity leave policy. So I never really took one, and I've been pretty much mixing parenting and working from the start, for better or for worse. I thought about how to answer this question, and I think one of the challenges for females that I've noticed is that work expectations for new moms are often dramatically lowered in a way that they're not necessarily for new dads. And I suspect that this can have consequences for both kind of your short and your long-term career trajectory. I would counter that being a mom, I think, has made me a better employee. Being a parent forces you into a leadership position. You have to think quickly on your feet, problem solve, be resilient. I would argue there's nothing quite like navigating twins through the terrible twos to teach you some of those skills. And I have found on several opportunities that putting my kind of calm but stern parent hat on has helped me manage employees who maybe need a little guidance to get them to excel. So I would encourage employers to consider the positive extra skills that moms can bring to the table. I have a good friend who is a lawyer for the US Attorney's Office, and she mentioned to me once that everything else being equal, their team tends to hire working moms because they just know how to get stuff done. So yeah.
For sure. Thank you for that. Susan Marie, would you like to chime in?
Yeah, I wanted to add to that. I am also a mom, and I had my kids while I was working at NOAA, and I really can't say enough about the flexibility that my office gave me. There are things that the federal government can do throughout the federal government, and that's pretty good right now. Recently, the federal government is now offering parental leave. It's not only maternity leave, it's also paternity leave. When I had my kids, I had to take sick leave, but it does depend on the office that you work in. And the head of my office was a dad, and he had a focus on work-life balance for himself that he was able to translate to his employees. And I will also say that I took my kids along with me to conferences and, just kind of made them part of what I did every day. And babies are a great draw at conferences because everybody who had to leave theirs behind will want to come and look at yours. But I just wanted to I guess, put in a plug for federal employment in terms of being very amenable to people being parents, whether they're mothers or fathers.
That's fantastic. Megan, did you have anything you wanted to add?
Sure. So I agree with Melanie and Susan Marie that although it is challenging to both have a career and children, and perhaps especially so at this time when we're balancing childcare and virtual learning, which is partly why I have a background screen on right now. We're balancing, those responsibilities with work. It's especially hard. I agree with Melanie that we do learn as mothers skills, very valuable skills that we can pull into the workplace. However, I think that perhaps the most valuable lessons that really are the most far-reaching are the lessons that are learned by our children as they watch us balance work and home. And my hope is that our children learn that women are leaders in science or whatever job is most meaningful for them, and that all people, including our children, deserve to live in a world of possibilities where they can choose a vocation, where they will be judged based on their contribution and not their gender, race, religion, and sexual orientation. So again, although I definitely agree that we learn from our children and we benefit at work, our children also benefit from us working.
Absolutely. What a great way to be a role model. Right, Alana.
All right. So Marla, this next question is for you, especially with your kind of breadth of incorporating all sorts of different social sciences alongside the biological science work. How has being a woman in the wetland science space influenced your perspective on the importance of diversity in the workspace, especially considering kind of your widespread understanding of the intersection of different social considerations?
Yeah, in terms of how that would translate in terms of wetland science is a little more challenging for me, but I can just speak, you know, on the diversity piece itself, really, in that, you know, that's always been a huge priority for me. You know, as someone in policy, that in terms of like gender diversity, most of those upper level management positions are still held by men today. If you look at, you know, even the federal government or some of the higher echelon positions, a lot of them are still held by men, and most of their staff will be women in many cases, which is, you know, interesting. You know, my experience coming up in terms of policy and some of these areas of science has again, just kind of, you reach a certain level as a woman, and then breaking that final glass ceiling has been the hardest part. Working in the nonprofit world, there's probably more women who are actually executive directors of nonprofits than men. It's a little opposite in that scenario in terms of the field that I work in, particularly for smaller nonprofits. Some of the larger nonprofits are still more male dominated, but the diversity piece, I think we need to dig deeper than just women. You know, Megan touched on this quite a bit in her discussions. You know, diversity of age. And I think, you know, the biggest burden is held by younger women in many ways, because as you get older, you get more confident, and you have more time to build up that level of confidence in terms of putting yourself out there and saying, this is, I'll just go, let me backtrack. When I first was offered the position of executive director and I accepted it, and the announcement was put out there, the biggest support came from other female colleagues in the field, whereas some of the male colleagues I'd had were honestly a little surprised. You know, they were a little taken aback at first, and that hurt a little bit at first, I will admit. But then, you know, I just said, well, that's okay. They're still good people. I'm going to prove to them that I'm worthy of this position, and that's just been my attitude ever since. And it's actually been my attitude my whole life, just growing up with a level of confidence that I can do this, and putting myself out there. And you do fall on your face from time to time, but that doesn't mean you're less worthy. It just means that you need to pick yourself up and learn from your mistakes and continue to move forward, just no matter who you are or what gender you are or where you're coming from. But I think age is an important thing to consider, and really providing that mentoring and support for young women and giving them those public speaking skills, not just the technology of the science, but also just how do you interact on a professional basis, and giving them the skills to do that, and exude that confidence and gain the respect that they need. But then also looking at women of color, looking at sexual orientation. You know, my wife and I have been married for more than 10 years, and you know, I still don't come out and broadcast that widely on a regular daily basis, because I know there are going to be certain biases against it from the outright, and I want people to know me who I am, just as Marla, and in my professional role. And then, you know, that's an easier thing in a sense to kind of cover up than color or the fact that you're a woman. So there's different levels and nuances of diversity that we have to consider as we move forward, as women in the field of wetland science and policy, that all need to be considered and all need to be discussed and treated equally. I don't know if I answered your question, but.
Absolutely. No, I think that was a great answer. Thank you, Marla. So since we are on to our last couple minutes here, I'm going to take us ahead to our final question, which I want to send first over to Laura. Laura, especially leading in education right now, we'd love to hear what are some ways that we can encourage and support the next generation of women to pursue careers in STEM?
Thank you, Elena. So I think this really needs to start down at the elementary level. I mean, I agree with what everyone has said about how to encourage in college, at the college level, to learn some of the technology skills. But I've seen in my own daughter, at like 6th, 7th grade, starting then, her not wanting to appear as this smart girl. And so she would hide her math tests in class so that no one would know. And that having me as a role model, of course, did not discourage her, because she graduated last year with a degree in kinesiology and art, and she's going on to get a master's. But I see that with girls, and I think we really need to start with our culture at that level, because like everyone's been saying, how women are treated in the workplace, that goes all the way back to that level. And even though teachers may be encouraging them, their peers are making them feel like they should not be smart or shouldn't be smart at math or things like that. And when I was that age, I just didn't care, you know, but a lot of girls do, you know, my daughter's very social, and that really affected her. She didn't want to be like her friend who was in all the accelerated classes. So when she went to go take a test to put her into those classes, she came out and said, I only answered the math questions I could do in my head. And I'm like, well, that's not going to get you in. It's like, why did you do that? But I think we need to figure out a way to change things at that level. But also once they do, I think it's really important to have networking and to get people starting in the college level then and getting them to see some role models. When I was starting out at the institute that I worked for, there were very few women. Most of the women, or at least in STEM, most of the women were secretaries or, you know, administrative staff. And so it was very hard to have someone to network with. So I think having those mentors is really, really important. I'll
Thanks
just
so
leave
much,
it there.
Laura. Yeah. Caitlin, what would you add? Especially, I know you've had some time in a very male-dominated space. So what would you add to that question?
Thanks, Alana. And I agree with what Laura said. You know, having a mentor is probably the most important thing for young women getting into STEM. So I think if we have the opportunity to be that mentor for somebody, I mean, we should. I had mentors when I was growing up, and I think it's made all the difference. I don't know if I necessarily knew they were mentors at the time. You know, it's just been like family friends, family members who were in these roles. And so I just never thought twice about it. I'm like, oh, yeah, my good family friend works at Argonne National Lab, and she's probably the smartest person I know. You know, the person you'd call if you were on Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. I'm like, she's the one I would call. And so that has just kind of been ingrained in me my entire life. But something else I wanted to mention is I did work for a civil engineering firm for about 7 years. And one of my colleagues there had this awesome idea to introduce a girl to engineering day, which I believe is adapted from a program that Purdue University puts on. And I learned so much from doing that. Like, there are better ways to talk about STEM fields to younger girls. Don't talk about how it's all math heavy and it's all very technical and you have to love math if you want to do STEM fields. I don't love math. I think, you know, you may have to be good at it, but you don't have to be passionate about it. I think you really just have to put the emphasis on, you know, helping people and how careers in STEM ultimately help people, you know, civil engineering, environmental science. And so that, I think, will grab the attention of the younger generation more so than focusing on the math and the technical aspects of it. You know, unless you really, really love math too, then that's also okay. But I think just thinking about how we present it and how, like, what language we use around STEM can make a big difference for young girls.
Awesome. Gina, what would you add? How do you think we can create more of an environment for younger girls to join STEM?
Yeah, so those two takes, it's hard to add on to those. I feel like that really covered a lot of it. I would just, reiterate, maybe not emphasizing the process of learning all these skills, but also that once you have those skills, they can have really great impact. And just like Caitlin said, you can help people and you can invoke change, and you can help the environment. And then going back to what Laura was saying, yes, exposing girls to those, you know, coding classes or learning how to use software and how those things can be really fun to learn about at a young age, and just giving them the chance to learn about those opportunities early, and then letting that direct, you know, what they want to major in college or what career they pursue, giving them the foresight of that when they're young.
Before we wrap up, Marla, would love to hear your take on this question as well. You've been in the field for a while. How can we bring more girls in?
I don't know what I can add that other people haven't said, you know, that mentoring piece again. And as I mentioned before, really helping them build those skills at building confidence, you know, how to interact with your colleagues, how to, you know, as Amber said in the chat box, stop apologizing for who you are and just be who you are and be okay with that. You know, I give a lot of credit to my mom as a child buying me the record "Free to Be You and Me" because I think it really had a huge influence on my, you know, my psychology as a child growing up. Where, you know, we really do need to encourage, you know, young women to be free to be themselves and to follow their passions and to not second guess themselves anymore. Just put themselves out there. I think that's one of the, you know, as Caitlin and Gina were saying, kind of get away from some of the nitty gritty technical pieces and that confidence building is key.
Absolutely. Thanks, Marla. Well, we are definitely over time today, so thank you guys so much for staying on. We still have so many amazing participants on here, so thank you guys all for going over time and for your incredible presentations and your contributions to the world of women in STEM. We will be sending out the recording of this webinar to everybody who has registered. So keep an eye out for that in the next few days. Share away with your friends and colleagues. And again, thank you so much to all our panelists for the work you do every day to inspire more women, girls, and younger generations to follow in your footsteps.
Thank you.